At its height, the Roman Empire controlled the world's money, yet money would later destroy it. This is not a story about barbarian hordes storming the gates of civilization. This is a story about how an empire, at the peak of its power, slowly poisoned itself from within through greed, corruption, and financial recklessness. The Roman Empire, founded in 27 BCE, stretched across 3 continents. It governed over 50 million people, connected distant lands through sophisticated trade networks, and built monuments that still stand today. Rome's power wasn't just military, it was financial. The empire had created something unprecedented, a unified economic system that allowed a merchant in Alexandria to trade with a soldier in Britain using the same trusted currency. At the heart of this system was the denarius, a silver coin that became the backbone of Mediterranean commerce. Citizens across the empire trusted these coins implicitly. They weren't just metal, they were promises, backed by the full authority of Rome. A denarius minted in the reign of Augustus contained roughly 95% pure silver, carefully weighed and stamped with the emperor's image. This wasn't accident, it was policy. Rome understood that trust in currency meant trust in the state itself. Marcus Flavius knew this trust intimately. As a grain merchant operating in the port city of Ostia during the 2nd century, his father had taught him a simple rule. A denarius is a denarius, no matter who hands it to you. The coin his grandfather clutched in 120 CE could buy 10 loaves of bread. The same coin in Marcus's purse in 180 CE? Still 10 loaves. Stability, predictability. These were Rome's gifts to its citizens. But Marcus, like most Romans, didn't see the cracks forming beneath his feet. Rome's financial system rested on 2 pillars: trusted currency and effective taxation. Tax collectors, operating through a system called tax farming, were responsible for gathering revenue from provinces and cities. In theory, this was efficient. In practice, it became Rome's first great corruption scandal. Tax farming worked like this. Wealthy individuals bid for the right to collect taxes in specific regions. They paid the state up front, then collected from citizens. Anything extra they gathered became personal profit. The incentive for abuse was obvious, and abuse became rampant. Gaius Publius had purchased tax collection rights for a region in Asia Minor in 190 CE. He paid Rome 500,000 sesterces for the privilege. His goal? Collect 750,000 and pocket the difference. But Gaius was ambitious. He hired enforcers, inflated assessments, and extracted 900,000 sesterces from farmers and merchants who had no recourse. When complaints reached provincial governors, Gaius simply paid them off. A gift of 50,000 sesterces here, a villa there. The system worked beautifully, for Gaius. For Rome, the rot was spreading. Citizens grew resentful. Faith in imperial justice eroded. Worse, the treasury never saw Gaius's extra profits. The money that should have funded roads, aqueducts, and armies instead lined private purses and paid bribes to officials who should have been enforcing the law. By the early 3rd century, this wasn't an isolated problem. It was systemic. Provincial governors routinely accepted bribes. Tax collectors operated like criminal enterprises. The very officials tasked with maintaining Rome's financial integrity were actively undermining it. While corruption hollowed out the tax system, emperors faced a different crisis: the army. Rome's legions, once a source of wealth through conquest, had become the empire's largest expense. Soldiers demanded pay. Maintaining frontier forts required resources, and by 200 CE, there were fewer territories left to conquer and plunder. Emperors found themselves in an impossible position: cut military spending and risk mutiny, raise taxes and spark rebellion. The solution they chose was quieter, more insidious, and ultimately catastrophic. They debased the currency. Debasement meant reducing the silver content in coins while maintaining their face value. If a denarius was supposed to contain 90% silver, mint it with 80% instead. Pocket the difference. Use the saved silver to mint more coins. Pay the soldiers. The theory was simple. No one would notice. But people noticed. Marcus Flavius noticed in 235 CE when a merchant from Gaul refused his coins, claiming they felt wrong. He noticed when bread prices crept upward, slowly at first, then faster. A loaf that cost 1 denarius now required 2, then 3. The coin his grandfather treasured, which had held its value for generations, was dying in his hand.
By 250 CE, the denarius contained less than 50% silver. Some coins were little more than bronze with a silver wash. Citizens hoarded old coins and spent new ones. Merchants raised prices to compensate. The government responded by minting more debased coins, which only accelerated the problem. Rome had created an inflationary spiral, and the emperor's advisors either didn't understand the consequences or didn't care. The numbers tell the story starkly. In 150 CE, a Roman soldier's annual salary of 900 denarii could support a comfortable life. By 270 CE, that same salary, still officially 900 denarii, was nearly worthless. Soldiers felt cheated, citizens felt betrayed, and the empire's leadership kept minting more bad money, hoping the problem would somehow solve itself. While the currency collapsed, Rome's political system descended into chaos. The 3rd century witnessed what historians call the crisis of the 3rd century, a 50-year period during which over 50 men claimed the imperial throne. Most ruled for less than 5 years. Many were assassinated. Some bought their position outright. This is where Rome's corruption became truly grotesque. The Praetorian Guard, supposedly the emperor's elite protectors, became kingmakers who auctioned the throne to the highest bidder. In 193 CE, after assassinating Emperor Pertinax, the Guard literally put the empire up for sale. Didius Julianus won the auction by promising 25,000 sesterces to each guardsman. He ruled for 66 days before being executed. This wasn't governance, it was a protection racket operating at the highest level of state power. Emperors, knowing their position depended on bribing the guard, diverted treasury funds to keep soldiers loyal. Money that should have maintained infrastructure instead bought temporary allegiance from men who would kill their employer the moment someone offered more. Julia Marcella watched this unfold from her estate outside Rome. Her family had served in the Senate for generations. Her grandfather had advised emperors, but by 250 CE, the Senate was a hollow institution. Real power belonged to whoever controlled the army, and controlling the army meant having money, lots of it. Julia saw senators accumulate vast estates while ordinary citizens starved. She watched as her colleagues bought positions, sold influence, and ignored the suffering beyond Rome's walls. When she dared to speak against a particularly corrupt governor in 255 CE, suggesting his systematic theft from provincial treasuries, she received a midnight visit from his agents. The message was clear: stay quiet or disappear. Julia stayed quiet. Everyone did. The empire's leadership class had become a criminal enterprise, more focused on personal enrichment than public service. Governors arrived in provinces with modest wealth and left as millionaires. They didn't even hide it anymore. One governor in Gaul built himself a palace that rivaled the emperor's, funded entirely by skimming provincial taxes. When questioned, he simply shrugged. Everyone did it. Why shouldn't he? By 270 CE, Rome's economy was in free fall. The currency was worthless, taxes were unbearable, corruption was universal. Citizens responded the only way they could. They stopped participating. Farmers abandoned fields rather than hand over crops to corrupt tax collectors. Merchants closed shops rather than accept worthless coins. Whole communities fled to the countryside, beyond the reach of imperial authority. The economic engine that had powered Rome for centuries simply stopped running. Marcus Flavius, now an old man, closed his grain business in 268 CE. The coins he accepted in the morning were worth less by evening. His customers couldn't pay. His suppliers wouldn't deliver. The port of Ostia, once teeming with ships and trade, grew quiet. Warehouses sat empty. The docks rotted. His son asked him why this happened. Marcus had no answer. He had paid his taxes, followed the laws, trusted the system, but the system had betrayed him. Somewhere, in marble halls far from Ostia, men in togas had decided their personal fortunes mattered more than the empire. They had stolen the future, coin by coin, bribe by bribe. The military situation reflected this economic catastrophe. Soldiers paid in worthless currency became unreliable. Legions that once marched with discipline now mutinied over pay. Frontier defenses, under-maintained due to budget shortfalls, weakened. When Germanic tribes pushed across the Rhine, they found not the legendary Roman war machine, but a hollow force, demoralized and broken.
This is crucial to understand. Rome didn't fall because barbarians were stronger. Rome fell because it could no longer afford to defend itself. The armies that should have stopped invasions were instead fighting each other in civil wars, each general promising his troops plunder if they'd make him emperor. The treasuries that should have funded defense had been looted by corrupt officials. The citizens who should have supported the state had lost all faith in its institutions. Rome's story ended in the 5th century with the collapse of the Western Empire, but the lessons echo through time with uncomfortable clarity. Today, we watch modern nations wrestle with the same demons that destroyed Rome: unsustainable debt, currency manipulation, systemic corruption, and the slow erosion of institutional trust. When central banks engage in quantitative easing, essentially creating money from nothing to fund government operations, they walk the same path Rome took with currency debasement. The terminology has changed, but the mechanism remains identical. Expand the money supply to cover expenses. Hope citizens don't notice the resulting inflation. Marcus Flavius would recognize this strategy immediately. He watched it destroy his livelihood. The parallels extend beyond monetary policy. Consider modern government spending. The United States allocates roughly 13% of its federal budget to defense spending, a figure that seems sustainable until you add unfunded liabilities, long-term debt obligations, and the political impossibility of cutting military spending. Rome faced identical pressures. Each emperor needed the army's loyalty, so each emperor paid more, regardless of whether the treasury could afford it. The result was a debt spiral that became mathematically impossible to escape. Corruption poses an equally troubling comparison. While modern democracies have built systems designed to prevent the kind of blatant bribery that characterized late Rome, subtler forms persist. Campaign donations influence policy, lobbying shapes legislation, revolving doors between government and industry create conflicts of interest that would have made a Roman senator nod in recognition. The scale and mechanisms differ, but the fundamental problem remains. When private interest corrupts public service, the state slowly loses its ability to function. Perhaps most significantly, Rome's collapse began not with external invasion, but with internal loss of trust. Citizens stopped believing the government served their interests. They stopped trusting the currency. They stopped participating in civic life. Sound familiar? Poll after poll shows declining trust in institutions across developed nations. Citizens increasingly view their governments as corrupt, self-serving, and indifferent to ordinary people's struggles. This isn't just political polarization. It's the same fracturing of social cohesion that preceded Rome's fall. Rome didn't fall to barbarian invasions. It fell financially decades before Germanic tribes walked through the gates. The empire collapsed because its leadership chose personal enrichment over public responsibility, because it manipulated currency rather than face hard fiscal choices, because corruption became so systemic that citizens lost faith in every institution designed to protect them. History carved this lesson in stone, then watched as generation after generation ignored it. Empires fall not with dramatic battles, but with quiet betrayals. A debased coin here, a bribe there, a treasury slowly emptied by 1,000 corrupt hands. The accumulation of small dishonesties, multiplied across decades, becomes catastrophic. Modern nations possess advantages Rome lacked: democratic accountability, free press, economic sophistication, technological tools for transparency. But these advantages mean nothing if not used. Rome had laws against corruption. It had penalties for currency manipulation. It had systems designed to prevent exactly what happened. But when the people responsible for enforcing those systems were the same people profiting from their violation, the safeguards became meaningless. The question facing us now isn't whether we're repeating Rome's mistakes. The question is whether we'll recognize them in time to change course. Currency manipulation dressed up as monetary policy. Corruption sanitized as political donations. Unsustainable spending justified by short-term necessity. The patterns are there, visible to anyone willing to see them. Rome stands as history's most expensive lesson in what happens when financial discipline fails, when corruption goes unchecked, when citizens lose faith in their institutions. The ruins scattered across Europe and North Africa aren't just tourist attractions. They're warnings. Prosperity without integrity is temporary. Power without accountability is fragile. An empire that chooses money over truth will eventually have neither. The barbarians didn't destroy Rome. Rome destroyed itself. The real question is, are we paying attention?